Okay, it looks like a few people are having a hard time getting up this morning, but thank you all for getting up early and getting here on time. So I just wanted to get started. I'm Patty Hasson, and I'm going to be the moderator today, and I'm president of Clarifi, which is based here in Philadelphia, a nonprofit that provides financial, credit, housing, counseling, and financial education. So the format today is going to be a little different. We're going to have the three presenters, and I'll give you a little brief bio on each, and their full bio is in the book. And then we are going to also, including in our question session, we really want to also generate some discussion about moving ideas, or moving from ideas to action. So if you hear something today that could be moved into action in your community, we want you to come up to the mic and tell us about it. And Dan here from the Federal Reserve is going to take some notes and include this on the conference final wrap-up. And if you need resources to move those ideas into action, what would those resources be? And the other topic that, again, as you come up to the mic, if there's some research interest coming out of what's discussed today, we would appreciate raising that also. So we're going to get started. Marty Smith is a senior community economic advisor at the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. He came to the Philly Fed from the Congressional Budget Office and Brookings Institute. Both positions served him well in his current role, where he conducts research in the areas of housing, finance, and homeownership counseling. He's going to present today some groundbreaking research on the effectiveness of pre-purchase homeownership counseling and financial management skills. This study makes a major improvement on previous research by using an experimental design with only first-time home buyer participants randomly assigned to a control or treatment group. Our next panelist will be Jonathan Mintz, who's the founding president and CEO of the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund, a national nonprofit that supports municipal efforts to help low-income families and individuals achieve long-term financial stability. From 2006 to 2013, he was the commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. He'll share with you today his innovative approach at CFE of integrating financial empowerment services into mainstream local government anti-poverty programs. Jonathan was also a second-grade teacher, which he was just telling me a little bit about, so I'm confident he'll keep you engaged if he could keep second graders entertained. Our third and final panelist is Ramy, Serageldin, Chief Operating Officer at Moven, an innovative debit card that provides users with money management tools and real-time updates on their purchases to ensure controlled spending. He came to Moven with over 15 years of experience in the financial services and technology industries, including Bank of America, with a focus on mobile and online banking and payments. When you see this creative card and app combination, you'll see how his past experience helped create a unique, forward-thinking product. In his introduction yesterday, President Plaza talked about Wayne Gretzky, famous hockey player, for those who weren't there and don't follow hockey, that skated to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. All three presenters were and are thinking ahead to where the puck will be in each of their respective approaches to cultivating greater financial inclusion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marty. And what I would suggest, if you can save your questions, I know you may have a lot as they go along, but we'll have the questions at the end. We'll have each present for about 15 minutes. Thanks.
First, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Daniel Hochberg of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and William Green of New York University. And next, I must mention the obligatory disclaimer, namely that the views expressed here are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. We begin today with some remarks on the importance of pre-purchase homeownership counseling. Next, a brief background on the study, and then the results of the study. Homeownership counseling provides training to clients that instill knowledge and skills needed to be a successful homeowner. Banks are funding homeownership counseling. Some are even requiring it as a condition for receiving a mortgage. In fact, an industry has grown around homeownership counseling. Nonprofits are offering services associated with homeownership counseling, and HUD is taking a stronger role in setting standards to oversee the administering of homeownership counseling services. There are three different groups that focus on homeownership counseling. One is academics, one is policymakers, and one is practitioners. Our initial intent is to strengthen the methodology used to evaluate the effectiveness of the counseling, which is at the core of the study. These goals are shared by clients, providers, funders, and policymakers. Namely, in the short term, a knowledge of budgeting, better understanding of managing credit, and making informed decisions about homeownership. In other words, helping prospective homebuyers determine whether purchasing a house is financially prudent and assist them in becoming mortgage ready. This might avert a situation that occurred in the recent downturn in the housing market when many home buyers were ill-prepared for homeownership. In the long term, homeownership counseling can provide a continuum of services that lead up to and include sustainable homeownership and stable neighborhoods. These are some questions of interest. Traditionally, credit history is the dominant reason for the rejection of low and moderate income applicants for mortgages. For many lenders, the first item that they focus on when evaluating an application for a mortgage is the individual's credit score. Consequently, we will be focusing on financial behavioral outcomes and especially credit scores. Like many domains within financial literacy research, homeownership education and counseling have never been rigorously evaluated through a randomized field experiment. Now, this quote underscores the value of our study. Its design will fill this void. Now, a little background on the study. Our study began in 2004 with the pilot testing of the study's survey instruments. The recruitment of participants started in 2007. Originally, the recruitment of participants was scheduled for 1 year. However, developments in the housing market made it necessary to extend the recruitment period, which ended in October 2008. The study was conducted under the auspices of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, with the assistance of Apt Associates, a consulting firm, and Clarifi, a counseling agency. Apt designed and pilot tested the study survey instruments and also had the responsibility to implement the study design, track study participants over time, and conduct baseline and annual surveys of the participants. Clarifi was charged with the task of recruiting study participants and providing free home buyer workshops and one-on-one counseling services. We designed the study, coordinated the activities of Apt and Clarifi, and conducted the analysis of the study's database. The overall objective is to have two groups of individuals seeking pre-purchase homeownership counseling who are alike in every way except that one group receives a particular counseling treatment or intervention. if there are measurable differences in the behavior of the two groups after one group receives the treatment, then the differences might be attributed to the treatment or intervention. There are several approaches that can be taken to evaluate the effectiveness of pre-purchase homeownership counseling. We have a study that contains a discussion of the various recent studies. The majority of the current studies of pre-purchase homeownership counseling examine past data associated with individuals who have completed a counseling program. On the one hand, some studies do not have a comparison group, but without a comparison group, it is difficult to discern whether the resulting behavioral changes in the individuals are due to counseling. On the other hand, some studies construct a comparison group by using a large database to select individuals from the same geographic location and who have similar characteristics. Since it is unknown whether those in the comparison group are interested in pre-purchase homeownership counseling, a key variable is missing, namely motivation. As a result, the results are affected by self-selection bias. Also, without assurances that the counseling was delivered in a consistent manner, the results might be compromised. As recommended by the study's panel of advisors, our study employs an experimental design with a control group and a treatment group. The control group received a 2-hour pre-purchase homeownership workshop and no other services. The treatment group received the 2-hour workshop as well as one-on-one counseling and any other workshops as needed. The study participants were randomly assigned to a treatment group or a control group. APT used a computer program with an algorithm that served as a random number generator. With the use of the computer program, the participants were randomly assigned to one of the two groups. We took several steps in order to ensure consistency in our study approach and address self-selection bias. During the recruitment process, we were interested in enrolling only first-time home buyers. As a consequence, we imposed some restrictions on eligibility to participate in the study. An individual could not be a homeowner, could not be under an agreement to purchase a home, could not have applied for a mortgage, could not have received any services from Clarifi in the past 12 months prior to enrolling in the study, and could not be participating with any lender, agency, or program that requires they receive pre-purchase counseling. The participants were tracked for 4 years after receiving assistance. Now bear in mind that our study was conducted during the downturn in the housing market, yet many of the participants were able to qualify to purchase homes, and those who did not become homeowners were able to improve their credit. We ended up enrolling 898 participants in the study. For each of the baseline characteristics of the study participants, a statistical test of difference in means was conducted between treatment and control cases. No statistically significant treatment control difference was found. As a result of these tests, we're confident that the random assignment was successful in producing 2 study groups that are comparable in their baseline characteristics. The characteristics include age, education, race, marital status, total number in the household, earnings, and various banking products, such as a checking account, savings account, and other retirement accounts. A shortcoming of many current studies that rely on past data is the inability to determine if counseling was conducted in a consistent manner. We address this concern by having APT conduct an all-day training workshop for the counselors participating in the study. APT prepared a binder that included background on the study and outlined a procedure for conducting the one-on-one counseling sessions, with, again, the intent on having the one-on-one counseling sessions conducted in a consistent manner. To be sure, there was consistency in the delivery of the one-on-one counseling. APT sat in on a selected counseling session and observed that the sessions were, in fact, conducted as outlined. To assist in the analysis, credit reports and credit scores were annually obtained to track changes in the participants' credit worthiness. In addition, information was collected about study participants and household members via annual follow-up surveys to track life changes over time. For our analysis, we focused on financial behavioral outcomes, namely credit scores, total debt, delinquency in payments, including mortgage payments, and homeownership rates. We compared the difference in these outcomes between the treatment group with one-on-one counseling and those in the control group. Remember, the goals of homeownership counseling are concerned with the effectiveness of the financial worthiness, the effectiveness on the financial worthiness of those who become homeowners, as well as those who don't. For our estimation procedure, we used the difference in differences approach. We begin with 2 groups that are quite similar in various key aspects, except that the treatment group received one-on-one homeownership counseling. Thus, when we used the difference in differences to compare the difference between the beginning and ending values of a financial outcome, for example, credit score, between the 2 groups, we get the behavioral difference in the treatment group relative to the control group. In addition to credit scores, we consider the impact of counseling on changes in the total debt balances of study participants, trade lines, and the trade lines include installment accounts, which are accounts where the payment amount and the number of payments are fixed, such as an auto loan, and revolving accounts, which are charge accounts with credit limit and a monthly minimum payment, such as a bank credit card or department credit card. Mortgage accounts are not included in these calculations, but considered later. We also consider the influence of the one-on-one counseling on delinquent payments. The delinquent status include 30, 60, and 90 days. Finally, mortgage delinquency for those participants who became homeowners. And finally, an overview of the results and conclusions. The use of experimental design improves upon previous research and directly counters self-selection bias on the part of the study participants. Pre-purchase homeownership counseling benefits those who later became homeowners and those who did not. Treatment group participants who received one-on-one counseling benefited more greatly than control participants, as observed by increase in credit score, smaller increase in total debt, decline in delinquent payments, and number of homeowners. Of the treatment homeowners that were studied with one-on-one counseling and their control counterparts, the treatment group had more homeowners, or 61 compared to 52. And finally, the treatment homeowners with one-on-one counseling and control homeowners paid their mortgage in a timely manner. Pre-purchase homeownership counseling could be viewed as a tool of inclusion. If used, it could improve the credit worthiness of low and moderate income individuals, which in turn could enhance their access to capital. Moreover, the counseling could increase their opportunity to become homeowners. As such, they would not only own their own place of residence, but also have a cornerstone for wealth building. Thank you.
Morning. So, here's the snake oil that I am selling. Let me tell you a little bit about the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund and the concept of municipal financial empowerment. And the basic idea being here to try to take the world of asset building and financial inclusion, which has largely resided in the nonprofit sector for the last couple of decades, and ask ourselves, as we originally did in the Bloomberg administration, whether or not cities brought genuine value add to the mix. Fast forwarding several years, the answer seems to be yes. We created a local office in New York, a national coalition, and now this national funding organization that I run, the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund, where we are working with mayors, their senior administrations, and their key partners, for example, in Philadelphia with Clarifi, to try to use the different mechanisms of city government to advance the financial security and stability of members. So, a step back. Why does city government care about individual families' security? Now, we're the choir, we all care, and we just assume everybody should. But when you start to ask yourself the question, well, why wasn't local government thinking about individual finances of the people that they're working with? And why might they now? I am influenced heavily by my former boss, Mayor Bloomberg, who really had us looking carefully at the data of what people we were working with were experiencing, what we were spending, and whether those expenses were being best used. These are public dollars, after all. And one of the things that you have to recognize, and I'm sure that many of you do, is that while the country is spending hundreds of billions of dollars on an array of anti-poverty initiatives, a huge portion of this money is being spent on people who are themselves financially insecure. And so the underlying equation is that of an often inefficient or unstable investment. You all know from many of your partners that you can invest heavily in somebody's workforce development services, for example, but if they're drowning in debt and their credit scores are bad and they either can't get a job or they get a job and their car breaks down and they don't show up for work and they come back and need services again to get a job, that investment that you've been making is an investment that you have to keep repeating. And so cities not only care morally about the finances of their residents, but in a colder, harder OMB analysis, they care because they're spending huge amounts of money, and with less and less resources available, they are spending them in more and more inefficient ways because of this financial insecurity. Luckily, however, local government has incredibly powerful opportunities to play a role in regard to financial accountability, stability. And first and foremost, I list accountability. What I love about the forces of accountability on local government is that there is a very raw, literal, real-time pressure on mayors to deal with the problems on their streets. That kind of pressure is hugely helpful, particularly for those of us who have the pleasure of working within government, to really be thinking boldly and to be thinking at scale about how to address that problem. So local pressure is strongest kind of pressure, and it can be a very motivating force for mayors and their teams to be thinking about solving problems. The second point that is really important when it comes to why municipalities play a key role here is access. When we thought, for example, in New York about the fact that there were 800,000 unbanked New York adults, the question of how to reach them is, of course, a complicated question, but one part that's not complicated is who they are and where they are, because for the most part, we're already touching those people. Now, maybe we're touching them in different services, but the fact that local government is literally touching their target populations, and touching them because the target populations are presenting themselves for help in multiple entry points of the service array, is another key advantage that local governments have when it comes to trying to solve the underlying financial instability issue. The third point I think of fondly now that the Bloomberg administration is done and we're gone, is power. Power is a hugely helpful tool when it comes to addressing financial stability in a couple of different ways. One is literal power. So, for example, in New York City, and I was just talking about this with Patty, in New York City, we literally regulated debt collectors, process servers, pawn shops, employment agencies, used car dealers. The ability to literally go after the industries that are preying upon the instability in many cases, not all the time, but preying upon the instability of the financially unstable, and to regulate market practices and to enforce when those market practices are breached is a huge and literal ability for local government to step in and say, not anymore. So, for example, just as a few examples, in New York, a couple of them, we regulated debt collectors. We said that debt collectors had to provide proof of the underlying debt. Well, that doesn't seem all that revolutionary. But in fact, the primary experience that we were hearing from consumers calling our mediation line was that they were being harassed for debts they didn't owe or didn't owe anymore. And so the ability to step in and with regulation say, we're going to address this problem and we're going to insist that anyone who wants to do business collecting a debt from a New Yorker will follow this rule or that rule is quite literal. In San Francisco, they have zoning regulations around payday lending. There are multiple examples across our partner cities in the country where cities have literally leveraged statutory power in order to address part of the equation of those who are financially unstable. And finally, scale. I mentioned this before. Cities have the pressure and the luxury of only thinking at scale. And as a result, when cities institute programs and policies in the way that they structure flows of money, in the way that they structure social services, in the way that they think about pilot experiments and partnerships with other organizations, the answer is not how many people can, the question is not how many people can we help, the question is how many people need help and how are we going to help all of them. And that kind of municipal pressure has really given rise to an exciting field of municipal financial empowerment. By the way, these colors were randomly chosen. In case there's any question. So one of the things that we did when we thought about financial empowerment originally in New York is we wanted to put our arms around this field in part out of sheer terror, because we didn't want to suddenly become the front door or all things anti-poverty. And really defining what this field was about may seem a little bit wonky, but you wouldn't be here if you weren't with me on that. And this is where we ended up, really thinking about high-quality counseling and education, access to safe and affordable banking, savings and other asset building, and then, as I mentioned before, consumer financial protections. I believe strongly that you cannot talk about helping people who are financially unstable if you're not including in that equation protecting them. So, I'm going to go back, sorry, 1 second. Over the course of the last several years, not just in New York, but in so many of our partner cities, there's been some really wonderful programming that cities have been pushing out from their city halls. In the financial counseling and education field, one program that we're very proud of and that we're now replicating in at this point a dozen cities across the country through the CFE fund is this one-on-one financial counseling model, locally done by Clarifi in a great way. And the idea here is, I think a little bit of my background, not as a second grade teacher, but also as a law professor. When we started a law school, you think to yourself, well, why do lawyers need to be licensed? Why do doctors need to be licensed? Well, because when people come to them, they are in big trouble. And if you screw up, you can really do huge damage. I believe the same is true for financial counseling. And so we have really led a movement to professionalize this field. All counselors that operate in a city-associated financial empowerment center in New York, in Philadelphia, across the country, are trained in credit-bearing courses with local colleges or universities, because I believe this field deserves that level of quality control. And also, when I go back to the political pressure that we talked about before, that helpful political pressure, a mayor cannot stand in front of his or her population and say, if you have problems with your finances, I suggest you go here, and then not know whether or not they're getting quality services that you can measure their impact and have some degree of quality control. So this idea of financial counseling has been very successful. We have measured across our cities literally millions of dollars of debt reduction. We don't count how many people walk in the door. We count how much debt they've reduced, how much savings they've amassed, where their credit scores are moving. The era of saying we can't quantify the impact of education and counseling, in my opinion, is dead. And that should always be the case, and that's certainly what cities need to be doing. The other thing that's been happening in financial counseling and education is increasingly we have found that while people are coming in droves, and last I looked in New York, before they locked me out, there were 3 weeks backlogs for all of... I wasn't locked out. That was a joke. We were term limited. Left voluntarily. Just want to make sure you're here. Okay. But one of the things that we started checking was not just how the counselors were doing and how busy they were and what the demand was, but when we really started to think about scale, which is daunting in some of these cities as large as they can be, we started thinking about integrating the counseling into other services. And that goes to the point that I was making before about how you can touch these target populations. So, for example, in workforce development, financial counseling is integrated into the delivery stream of the way that's done in New York. Here in Philadelphia, you're doing some great work with a number of city services, including public housing. As another really fascinating example, I heard a study recently that blew me away, where the public housing corporation in one city measured how quickly people moved out of arrears if they got this kind of high-quality financial counseling, and how likely they were to fall back into arrears afterwards. And the numbers between those who did and didn't get counseling were startling. And once you make that equation, once you prove that financial counseling actually makes those investments smarter investments, and we call it the supervitamin effect, then you start to see cities investing in those kinds of services and really addressing that sort of underlying financial instability. So other areas include access to safe and affordable banking, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, savings and other asset building. There's some really wonderful programs that tie the EITC into match savings programs. That's being replicated in cities across the country. And I mentioned consumer financial protections before. I want to talk a little bit more this morning about our access to banking initiative, Bank on 2.0. When we started thinking about banking access in New York, let me tell you the recipe. So the mayor was about to experiment with a conditional cash transfer program that he had seen in South America, and part of the program was going to be pushing out money to people on a regular basis over a couple of years to incentivize behaviors. We stepped in and said, well, a huge portion of these people who are lining up to be in this program are unbanked. So if you're going to measure the impact of money on them, you're going to have a real problem because they're going to be spending a lot of money at check cashers and spending money to have checks written to pay their bills. So what we did is, using the power and the magic curtain of the Wizard of Oz, we called all the banks and the credit unions together and said, the mayor's about to push out this program. It'll be very high profile. There's a large number of people. We're pushing out money on a regular basis. This is the account we need. And if you're willing to offer this account, we will, in a sense, broker and sell this account for you when people are signing up for the program. So using a few behavioral economic tricks, nudges, when people signed up for this program, which they were very excited to do, we said, you need to get direct deposit in order to receive the money. 55% of them said, I don't have a bank account. We said, no problem. Here's the New York City Safe account, basic appropriate account, no overdraft. Here are 8 different institutions. Choose whichever one you want. They're all offering the same. And we signed them up. At the end of program registration, all but a handful of people who were unbanked were now banked. The other thing that was exciting is that because they were part of a program and not just the general public, we were able to code these accounts with our banking partners and look at aggregate data a couple of years later and see that something like 95% of them still had those accounts open 2 years later because they were decent accounts. That kind of cross-leveraging, the ability of a city to say to their banking partners, I've got scale, I've got PR, and I've got a brokering ability, and the ability to say to the public, I've got an appropriate account, and it's standing between you and money that you're looking for, has been the basic philosophy of many cities as they have thought about how to address the question of the unbanked. Now, many of you have heard of or been a part of bank-on movements in cities across the country. Those bank-on movements are all local initiatives. They have greatly varied from some that are just press conferences to some that are outreach campaigns to some that are much more nuanced account-laden programs. Bank on 2.0 is going to be a national effort run through our CFE fund that tries to take a look at where some of those programs have gotten into trouble. Addressing barriers is really important. Many of you are familiar with the check system. You can have the best banking access initiative in the country, but if a bunch of your people who say, yes, I want an account, slam into the brick wall of being on the check system list, they're not going to get an account. And so our ability to work with banks and try to build a national consensus of best practices around something like check systems and to work with our regulator partners, I think, is one example of the kind of barriers that local initiatives have really been suffering under. Negotiate products and policies. If a city is going to use its good name to tell people that there's an opportunity to get banked, then that opportunity needs to be a quality one. And banks are excited about working with cities, but they don't want to negotiate city by city, by town by town by town. So we'll be taking a national approach there. Identify access points. This is really key. As I mentioned, cities are touching these populations, and finding how to structure the flow of those programs, the flow of those dollars, to leverage that banking moment is key. And here's an example of a pilot that we just announced recently. Many of you are familiar with the summer youth employment programs, federally funded, although that funding has been decreasing over the last several years, not surprisingly. And this is a group of young adults, age range from 14 to 24, and there are huge populations of people huge dollars that are going to them, and this should be a banking access moment. So the CFE fund is putting its money where its mouth is, and by that I mean we're putting Citibank's money where our mouth is, and we are piloting in 5 cities starting this summer to rejigger the structure of these programs with an eye toward replicating in other cities as well, so that the summer youth experience is a mainstream banking entry experience as well. Again, it seems relatively basic, but those kind of connections are what we're about. Thank you.
All right. So my name is Ramy Serageldin with Moven. For those of you who don't know Moven, we're a startup based in New York, and our goal is to help people better manage their money. So talk to you today a little bit about how to apply technology to some of these problems. And as our other speakers have talked about, I think there are some great opportunities, and want to talk to them about how we can get in that NY Safe program as well. So at heart, I'm a technology geek. But I think it's interesting, how technology impacts behaviors. Before there was writing and data storage, it was just word of mouth. People told things, stories got changed, histories got changed. Then you added computation. It was the ability to churn through that data, to do analysis that was faster and stronger and independent of an individual doing it. And then today, with mobile and other very advanced technologies, you have the ability to do decisioning that's contextually aware, that's action-driven. And in our life, it's applying to everything now. How you stay fit. You're using technology for that. Fitbit. How many of you guys have a Fitbit? Hands up. All right, not bad. I don't work out, so it's not a judgment. It's all natural. So you think?
Oh, you're making us jealous.
Well, my wife's very strict. So if you think about it from a taxi perspective. Especially in a city like New York, if any of you have ever tried to get a cab in the rain, it's virtually impossible. It's like they all hide. Uber is changing the way you do that. Other companies like Halo and so on, changing the dynamics, putting you in touch with the driver so they know exactly where you are. Also ahead of time how much it's going to be. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of that. And then even for love apps, there's something called Tinder. I won't ask how many of you use it, but it is essentially a different way of, it's a different take on the online banking. It's very mobile-centric. It not only will allow you to find different folks, but you can essentially say you like them or don't like them, and it's also location-based. So if those people are actually near you, relatively, you can connect in real time, should you like to. So it kind of brings that chance meeting that you'd have in real life to the digital world. So in today's world, there's almost always an app for that. If you think about it, when was the last time you couldn't find your way, couldn't name a song, didn't know how to find a flight, etc. We've become very reliant on technology, and it's enabled a lot of capabilities. But what about in banking? And I'm taking a slight jab at our friends at Chase. But if you look at their app today, and they do have a new app coming out, so I won't judge that one yet, but it's very information-based. Here's your account, here are your balances, you can pay bills. It's about all it tells you. And if you look at any major bank's mobile app, it's the same. And when you talk about behavior change, you're saying, well, what are the tools that you're giving this person to be able to help them change their behavior? And a lot of the innovation that's coming out is around coupons. How do you get a discount for something? So we're shoving coupons into our mobile wallets, or we're shoving coupons into our online banking experience. But, okay, and that's great. We all want to save money, but is that really what they need? Or they're changing the actual physical way that you make a payment. So if you're familiar with Coin, it combines all of your plastic cards into one, and that way you don't have to select different ones at the point of sale. Or with Square Cash, which is now changed to a different product, but you didn't even need your wallet. You just walked in, your app checked in for you, the clerk at the checkout would see your face, and you would confirm that you purchased something, you'd walk out. So it completely takes away any thought that you're actually buying something. So they're all doing a very good job of removing friction. But they're removing friction from purchasing. So, of course, perfect world, everything's on sale, everything is by us just waving our hands saying, I want it. It's like being a 2-year-old. It's like, yes, this is mine. And it would be great. But is that really what people are asking for? Has anyone ever said, man, it's so hard to spend this money that I have. Can you please make it easier for me to spend this money? And for the most part, no. So you have to ask yourself, well, what is it that the banks are doing? And it's no surprise, actually. There's a couple studies that show, and my data is a little millennial focused, but I think the consensus applies across all segments, is they're not impressed with what their banks offer. They think it's a commodity product. They'd rather go to the dentist than into a bank branch, which is a fascinating stat to me. And they don't expect to be. That's potentially the even worse part of that. They've sort of given up on the banks providing that innovation. Now, they're going to be very excited about a Google or Facebook or some sort of technology company, maybe a Moven, that provides something that is differentiated for them and that can meet their needs. Just again, if you look at the Fast Companies list from last year, Square is the only financial services company up there, and they've done a great job of innovating. But again, it's how do they help small businesses purchases. And then in the finance peer group, Amex was the highest rated at number 7. That was actually a financial institution. And a lot of it is because the banks are asking the wrong questions. And you have to stop asking the questions that what people want. Right? The Henry Ford quote is a very good one. That if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, not a car. So you have to start to think, well, what are the capabilities that technology can enable that allow you to give something to somebody that they're not even expecting but really, really want and really, really need and can change their lives? So what is the need that people have? And I think everyone in this room knows this inherently and intuitively, but they need help managing their money. They need help getting out of debt. There's some stats from millennials that are pretty shocking. Higher unemployment than the average. A quarter of them live with their parents still post-college, don't pay their bills on time, and have no cash savings whatsoever. And that's a very scary situation for somebody to be in to try and advance their lives. Now, the live with their parents one alone would motivate me to change on what's happening. So we asked ourselves at Moven, can it work the other way? Can you remove the friction from saving as opposed to removing the friction from purchasing? And if you think about what's the friction in saving, it's understanding your money, it's understanding how you spend your money, what's a good decision, what's a bad decision, and then also creating tools that make that easy for you. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll give you just a quick background on Moven. But when we started out, we set out to transform retail banking from I'll borrow a quote from our founder, from something you do to something, from some place you go to something you do. Banking is something that should be part of your everyday life and should be part of the decisions that you make on a regular basis. So set out to be the primary financial app. And we are very, very mobile focused. Obviously, we're a startup. We're not going to build branches or invest a lot in that type of technology. We're going to invest in the app. It also needs to be cost effective from a business model perspective, because it inherently is a problem if your business model doesn't work. You will start to charge fees for customers. Your incentives are not aligned with your customer's incentive. And that's unfortunately the case with a lot of the banks. They just have a legacy infrastructure with branches and large populations of employees that have a cost base associated with it. So they're not able to offer an account as often as they'd like that meets the needs of customers without fees. And then our goal was 3 to 5 interactions per day, because we feel that if you think about it, you wake up, you check your balance, you check your status, you make purchases throughout the day, you understand the impacts of those, and then at the end of the day, you kind of see how you did. Now, that's our goal. We're getting to that. The point is, banking shouldn't be something that at the end of the month or when you have a bill coming up that you start to think about. It should be something you think about with every purchase as you're going throughout your life. So, quick overview of the product. It's 100% app-based. We do have a web presence, but it's kind of something we just have for emergency support and suspending your card and things like that. But the app experience is, the experience is you download the app, you sign up within the app, and then your approval comes within a couple days, depending on how busy our queue is. We'll then mail you a debit card, so it's a prepaid debit card at its core, along with a contactless sticker that you can put on the back of your phone for making payments at PayPass locations. So same type of technology that's in a Google Wallet or ISIS, if you're familiar with that. The main thing, though, that we're really differentiating on is what you see in number 2, so the money management tools. With every purchase that you make, you get an instant feedback. And when I say instant, it's about 2 seconds. Literally, sometimes it beats the receipt that prints out at the point of sale. And on that receipt, or excuse me, on that notification, it will tell you where you spent the money, how much you spent, what category that is, and how much you've spent in that category month to date. So in this example, it's a little hard to read, but this person went to Macy's, spent $13, and it was shopping, and they've so far spent $456 in shopping. But the idea is that it instantly gives them an idea of the impact of that purchase on their budget, on their overall spending. So it's not at the end of the week or at the end of the month you suddenly figure out, holy cow, I spent all this money, where did it go? You instantly recognize that. You see below it our pulse. The pulse is essentially a easy-to-use gauge to understand how you're doing in relation to the overall budget you have. Now, it's if you notice, it's not charts, it's not pie graphs or line graphs or very complex things like a lot of other budgeting tools are. What we try to focus on is this is much like a speedometer, and it tells you how you're doing. Are you in the red, are you in the yellow, or the green, and relatively how red, green, or yellow are you. And so this person's $35 under average at this point in the month. So it's not that you have $2,000 to spend all month. It's at this point in the month you have allocated this much to spend, and how are you doing relative to that. And again, it gets updated instantly. The third is integrating with social. So money management, like anything, like weight loss, like finding love, is a very social experience. And so we're starting to build in integrations with social networks. The idea is, one, very functionally, you can send money to friends via Facebook, SMS, and email. But also we're starting to share that financial empowerment, share your achievements. And it doesn't necessarily, and we'll talk more about this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying, I saved $500, but it's, I met my goal 3 months in a row. And that starts to build that social aspect of managing your money. And then finally, we recognize that many people aren't going to have this account being their only account, but we do hope it's their primary account. We allow you to link in your other bank accounts, so your B of A, your Chase, etc., and we pull that information into your experience as well.
You said it was a prepaid debit card. How does it connect to your checking?
How does it connect to your checking? So you can load the card through either ACH or direct deposit. So, but it itself is a value store. So once that money's on there, it's with our partner bank that's insured. So kind of taking that same lesson of what mobile can do, the old way of getting around, the Griswolds, anybody? No? Yes? No? Kind of just driving around, floating through the desert. In the new world, and this is really where we tried to the way we look at a purchase decision and when you make any sort of money decision, is you need the context, the control, the advice, and the action. So in the example of getting around with a map down, the context is, where am I? I want to go from New York to Philadelphia to come to the conference. The control is, what can I do? What are my options? So an example is, I can take the train, I can take the plane, or I can drive. The advice says, if you take the plane, you're going to spend a lot of time in line. If you're going to drive, you're going to get stuck in the tunnel, and you should probably take the train. It's the fastest and the cheapest. The point is, it provides those options for you instantly. And the action is, how do you do it? Here are the directions to the Penn Station to get there. So it's taking this same example and applying it to banking is what we're trying to do. But the key is understanding the driver. What motivates the driver and what helps them make those decisions. I'm going to get into a little bit of psychology, but I'm not a psychologist, so don't ask any questions about those. There's Tom Waits is a singer, but he says we're all just monkeys with money, which means, and guns is the full quote. But The point is that we're fighting our inherent animal instincts for just instant gratification versus our human instincts for long-term understanding and long-term benefit. And so any tool you create has to help somebody balance those two things. Again, it's just a different way of looking at it. It's the rational thought versus the immediate rewards in the limbic system. And so it's creating, how do you create an immediate gratification for a long-term reward? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Short run, I just wanted to put this picture in here, to be honest. The short run is this cake is awesome, and I want to eat it now, and it's great. But then the next day you don't feel the reward of that cake anymore. And a similar idea is, okay, you want to make a short-term purchase, and you might feel that instant gratification of that cup of coffee, but what is the long-term trade-off of that piece of cake or that coffee? What are you not able to do long-term? And so building tools that start to expose those trade-offs to people, because often you just don't think about it. It's just $3 or it's just $2. But over time, that $3 or $2 can start to add up, and things like that. So how do you design for success in the mobile world? So again, using the same framework for finance, we'll explore that a little bit. Context, so it's where am I, right? It should be effortless. And for us in financial services, that's the data collection and the transaction categorization. So it's often hard for just somebody to even understand where all their money is going. And so the first step is help them get that for them. And that's where we allow you to link your existing bank accounts as well as the spend that you do on the Moven card. And then categorize it for them. And we do that as well. And also make it simple. We don't have 35 categories. We don't have custom categories. We have 12. And they're split up into 2 categories: wants and needs. Your wants are your dining out, entertainment, travel, that kind of stuff. And your needs are things that should be on a regular basis, more consistent: groceries, mortgage, etc. And then meaningful. So, okay, where are you and what does that mean relative to other people or relative to where you think you should be? And so it's providing that context relative to others and industries. And above all, it should be simple. So as I mentioned before, simple tools, a very simple rolled-up analysis of that, because it's very actionable. Old budgeting tools and PFM tools went way too deep and gave great and detailed computational analysis, but no insight, no advice, no actions on that. So control, what can I do? The short term versus the long term. So it's understanding, this person in the convertible is loving life right now and has no idea that what's going to come in the future because of the decisions they're making now. It's a bit of an extreme example, yes. But the point is, again, the purchases you make today, how it impacts tomorrow. But also understanding what your options are. So this person should get out of the way. And then as I talked about before, you want to try and make these decisions emotional. So our sad friend here is sad because her father spent money on something else and thus couldn't buy her a birthday gift. So again, it's helping people understand the trade-offs and assigning emotional aspects to it. An actionable aspect of this is goal setting, right? So if you say, I want to buy a gift for my daughter, and you start to put money towards it, then you recognize, okay, this is the benefit of it. And if you don't do it, then this is why it's not happening. And be predictive. This is our money path. So it shows essentially what you're spending is the blue line, and what your predicted spend is, or what we think your predicted spend is. And so it gives somebody a point in time understanding of where they are, but also to get an idea of how they spend money throughout the month. And then finally, the last piece was the advice, or the second last piece of the advice. What should I do? So it's providing somebody with the next steps. How do I save money for that goal? And providing them tools for that, whether it be tools for savings or tools for providing a discount, which isn't a problem. And also it needs to be aligned with their incentives. So providing a discount when the time is right. So if they're overspending, we're not going to provide them an offer for a new TV. But we might provide them an offer for groceries, or something like that. If they're in the green and they're saving for a goal, then, and that goal happens to be a TV, we'll help them find the best offer for that TV and help them buy it when the time is right. So it's aligning your incentives and aligning the product's incentives with the customer. I won't skip this because it's not that it's not important, but this is our Moven oath, and it's based off of the Hippocratic Oath, but it's do no harm, prevention before cure, and care for the community. Make sure the solutions are aligned, help somebody before it's too late, and then care for the community. As you help people become more financially stable, they will be able to help other people in their community as well, either by simply just telling them, hey, this is what I did, or hey, now that I'm better off financially, let me also help you with some things. And so we recognize that there is a positive benefit to what you're doing. And finally, the action is make it simple. If I'm ready to save, and you've told me that, as a company, you've told me that you want to save money, I'm going to provide you very, very simple ways to do that. You make a purchase, I give you an option to save $5 instantly, to essentially assign what we call a tariff-based saving. Every time you make a purchase, we move money. It's kind of like the keep the change idea. Statuses, achievements, and milestones. So it's providing people those rewards and gamifying the experience so they feel that they're achieving something even though they're not necessarily buying something. So it's, again, changing that reward from being a purchase to points or goals. And then rewarding good behaviors and penalizing bad behaviors. It doesn't necessarily mean costs, but it just means those points and things like that. So that's what we set out to do. We're very excited to talk to partners that would like to partner with us, potentially. And we are just beginning. So join us. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. And I think, as I was talking about earlier, another great Wayne Gretzky quote is that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you think about it, 5 years ago, in the middle of a housing crisis, for the Philadelphia Federal Reserve to do a study on the effectiveness of homeownership counseling, here we are 5 years later with some really great results that I think those in the audience can use, whether you're a housing counselor like we are, or Terry, like your PHFA, trying to develop programs and talking to people about how important it is, that component. I think it really helps. And then Jonathan, to look at financial counseling and say it's a government service and it's going to provide inclusion in a financial world for clients that they're already working with, again, way ahead of its time, and taking a shot on a program that could have been different results. And then I think, Ramy, to your point of a financial product that's kind of instant and trying to get people to change behavior in that moment, again, something that's innovative and looking differently at trying to help all consumers from a financial behavior and inclusion piece. So does anyone have any questions? The study is downstairs, so I will start with on the study itself, the results, or any thoughts. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking for, you can use the microphone if you.
Okay, this is open. Are you on the panel with questions?
Yes.
That's great. Maybe very actually. So my question, based on the research kind of presented by both Mr. Smith and also Mr. Mintz, which is just to say that research shows that one-on-one financial counseling is really more impactful. And given that there's kind of this ubiquity around going out and delivering a financial education workshop or online kind of tools which might teach about budgeting, for example. So one-on-one counseling, while very impactful, is all resource intensive, right, in terms of city budgets, for example. So my question is kind of how do you respond to that maybe pushback or the public official who would say, this is just not affordable, because I certainly appreciate that one-on-one is more ultimately getting us to where we want to go.
Well, keep in mind that in the study, the participants in the control only received a 2-hour workshop, yet some of them improved their credit worthiness, so that was effective. So you don't have to have the one-on-one to be effective. It just seems that relative to a 2-hour workshop, it is more effective but it is clearly effective just for the 2-hour workshop, which is what I think a lot of counseling agencies provide.
And
I would-
Jonathan, before you jump in, I want to add, too, as part of the study, individuals who took the 2-hour workshop, many of them self-selected out of, even though they were eligible for the one-on-one counseling, they said, I'm not ready for it yet, right? And that's a great outcome, as opposed to they may have just gone right to getting a mortgage thinking they were ready. So I think what the one-on-one counseling did is it enhanced the workshop for the participants who did take up the one-on-one counseling.
And then I would say in the financial counseling, the personal finance field, I think the difference between a class or a website and one-on-one counseling is like, Wii bowling versus bowling. I think that the question that we asked ourselves is exactly the question that you raised, which is, it's terrific to think about a high-resource, gold standard approach to services, but a city can't afford to say, gee, if we invest in these 30 people, we're really making a difference. Their scale is too big. And so the question from the beginning on Financial Empowerment Center, the Financial Empowerment Center model, was improving that it delivered the quality impact on the client. And then I mentioned a little bit in my remarks something that we're studying called the supervitamin effect, which is measuring how that financial counseling impact is helping to save money in other aspects of city services. And so there are numerous examples. I mentioned public housing, where people were coming out of arrears faster because you were helping them with their counseling. Domestic violence, the average victim goes back 7 times before usually she leaves a bad situation, and personal finance is the number 1 or the number 2 reason that she's going back. So really, our financial empowerment centers in cities across the country aren't just delivering this gold standard service, but they are all positioned to make the case for that gold standard service delivering the kind of impact that is saving money. In other words, it's how you talk to OMB, your Office of Management and Budget, not how you talk to the press.
I guess the one thing I'll add is that we recognize that there is, the one-on-one counseling is obviously the best, but the counselor can't be with you on a regular basis. And so we feel that a tool like this, and any technology tool in general, not just ours, can help with that on a day-to-day basis, providing that information. So it kind of works very well together.
What's your strategy with credit counselors across the U.S. to get them a tool like this or other tools like this?
Just the question is, what is the strategy for
Credit counselors across the U.S.
with credit counselors across the U.S.?
So we're open for partnership with anyone who wants to work with us. We've done some work already. One of our directors, Mohammed Khalil, has worked a lot with Clarifi and other groups to essentially to start to, I won't say modify our product, but to target our product to meet those needs. So right now it's very focused on the day-to-day spending and helping you build up a savings. Some of the tools that we'll start to add will be things that are focused on paying back the debt, very focused on that. But initially we want to start with building up enough savings so you have the extra cash flow with which to pay back that debt.
Okay. And can you please use the microphone? Sorry. And you know what, if you can identify, give your name and where you're from, that would be helpful too.
I was wondering if you've done any outreach on college campuses, because me being a recent college graduate, I think your app would be very useful.
Yeah, no.
Student loan debt.
Well, you can download it in the App Store. But we definitely do. I think one of the say the hurdles we have with the extremely younger generation or the college kids is right now we only have a non-documentary way of onboarding customers. So they tend to have, if you're familiar with IDV processes that are electronic, if you don't have a very big credit history, it's harder to find somebody on that list. We are working with some partners to expand that and working directly with colleges to actually leverage their documentation, et cetera, to bring on those customers. But definitely, we'd love to catch them early on before they start to make bad habits. That's the idea. Teach them the good habits before it's too late.
How about any ideas, I guess, in your communities, whether that was a great suggestion about college campuses, but any thoughts as to where these products might be applicable within your community? Or Terry, I'll put you on the spot. PHFA, I think you're innovating on a program kind of using the counseling model.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency is a service. It's probably one of the larger services here in Pennsylvania. And additionally, we fund a network of counseling agencies in Pennsylvania. We have decided to incentivize a program. We have decided to incentivize a program called the Delinquency Prevention Program. And basically, we are expanding the opportunities for the counseling agencies in our network to fund long-term counseling. So we're looking for individuals who are thinking about perhaps buying a house one day, 2 years from now, and integrating financial literacy concepts over a long-term period. So we're not talking to them about purchasing a home. We're talking to them about getting their financial house in order to prepare to be a good renter, to prepare for being a good citizen, to prepare for being potentially a good homeowner. On the back end, we are referring our delinquent borrowers to the counseling agencies for assistance, so that in the early stage, like as soon as they miss their first payment, you'd be surprised how many of our borrowers miss that first payment once they get into the home. I mean, it drops significantly between 30 and 60 days, but the 15 to 30 day, because many of the renters that we support are still not in tune to understand that they're late after the first day of the month. So we are automating some of that process, and we're also integrating, of course, the one-on-one counseling provision that we have historically provided. So we're going to look at that as a pilot. We have about 19 agencies of the 81 agencies that have agreed to do this work, and potentially we're going to be able to report on certain outcomes using the credit score, of course, as one of them, to see how effective we are. And if we are effective, we'll integrate that as a program that the rest of the network can use over time.
Well, that sounds really great. One suggestion that I would make as you're at the design phase is to also try to quantify the costs that you're offsetting, right? Try to take a look at the people who you're counseling and measure what it would have cost you if they hadn't had the counseling that helps them, and how much money that you're spending within the system on arrears abatement, for example, or debt collection, that sort of thing, so that you can not just make the case for the service being a quality service, but to the point that was made earlier, to the service being an efficient, investment as well.
Which is a great point to future research as we're capturing that around that type of program.
I have a small question to John. I've used in my career counseling sessions as well as while working with my refugee community the FTC's resources, Federal Trade Commission's resources for even like credit education and other information in their website. Has that been seen or used in your attempt at financial empowerment, or is it a totally different way of doing it, reinventing another wheel?
That's a loaded question. We're reinventing a wheel. No, here's what I would say. I think that there are low-touch opportunities for education, and those low-touch opportunities, you want to make sure that the resource that you're using is a high-quality resource. And so the example that you gave, FDIC, there are other federal agencies that have some very high-quality, low-touch approaches to education. I believe that, and this goes to the point I was making earlier about the literal pressure on a city to deliver solutions, I think that when people are in trouble, they don't need education, they need help. And the model of the Financial Empowerment Center counseling, for example, is not about teaching people, it's about literally helping them. It's about doing a health assessment with them. It's about picking up the phone and calling their creditors. It's an actual service model, not an education model. So I'm not comparing one to the other, but that's better. But what I am saying is they're really different approaches to what you're trying to do.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Dina Weiss, and I'm a professor at the University of Tennessee. The question I have is that when we're doing research, particularly longitudinal research that involves following people over several years, we so quickly run into the human subjects and privacy restrictions or oversight of the IRBs. How do you deal with those, particularly if you are requiring participation or asking for participation in programs that require this or that the government requires? Would that not violate the autonomy?
Are you asking?
I'm asking the two of you who talked about.
Do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Well, in our particular case, we didn't have to get any okay from the government. But what we did do was to have the potential participants sign a waiver so that we laid out what it is that we were going to provide to them and what their responsibilities would be in responding and maintaining their attendance as far as the study was concerned. But I agree with you that if you have to get the okay for the government, it does add a layer to it. I think that one of the challenges is trying to maintain the contact with the participants in the study over a period of time. There's going to be attrition, but hopefully if you have a good system set up, which fortunately we had, where we maintained contact with the participants, we ended up having, I think it was only out of the 898 participants, only 60 dropped out. So we had a continuation of about 93%, which is much higher than most people encounter.
And you did offer a minor incentive, too. So,
Yes,
right,
yes.
so, to participate. What was the annual incentive?
So $25 initially, and then $5 more for each year up to the fifth year.
So we have two different approaches to data collection. In the Empowerment Center model, where you are doing individual counseling, we do drug them and get them to sign a release for us as well. Anybody listening? Drugging the poor. Okay. No, we get them to sign a release, and we have a central database that allows us actually in real time, regardless of the counselor, regardless of the center, regardless now of the city, that is tracking their individual outcomes, and they come from multiple, in many, many cases, come from multiple sessions, so we're able to track progress. In addition, we have permission from them to do soft pulls of their credit scores, so even if they're, that we haven't seen them in a month or two, we can still pull data to track their progress. That's how we pull data in the actual service model. In the larger program models that I talked about, part of that is about partnering with your financial institution and getting them to be able to code the account account, and working with them, or sometimes the Federal Reserve could be a great interim middle partner to get aggregate data about people in the program, which is usually plenty of data to make your case.
Ramy, I have a question for you. You had talked a lot about millennials. Is that your target market, or are you looking to expand beyond that? And perhaps there might be people in the audience who may be interested to hear where that might go.
Yeah, so our target is anyone who really wants to better themselves financially. So the data on millennials was, to be honest, the easiest to find, but the statistics are the same, I think, across most segments. So we've actually been approached by a lot of people that help retirees manage their fixed income, because essentially it's an easy tool for them to get. It simplifies the banking experience. They're not in some complex online banking app. And a lot of them, surprisingly, actually do have mobile phones and smartphones. The group we've actually had, we're still relatively small, but it's indicative data. But the group we've had the most success with actually are the people of the 25 to 35 range. And we think that's primarily because these are people that are hitting different life stages, and they're recognizing, okay, I'm no longer just out of college. I can't continually just party. These student loans are starting to come due, and I need to get my life in order. And then many of them are getting married or starting to have kids on the upper end of that. And so they're recognizing, okay, I need to start managing my finances better to build a 529 for my kid, to buy a house, to do whatever. So it applies to any segment so long as you're actually motivated to better yourself financially on that front.
Okay. Well, it does look like we're just about out of time, so I just want to thank again our panelists for coming today. I encourage you, the study is downstairs at the registration tables, and get the detail. I know Marty didn't have a lot of time to go into the very specifics about the credit score improvements and delinquency, et cetera, so I would encourage you to read that. We look forward to hearing more about the work that Jonathan is doing in terms of connecting municipalities to financial inclusion. And I encourage you to take a look at the app. I actually have it, and it's kind of interesting to go into a Starbucks and immediately be told that you're over on your dining out budget, which I tend to be quite a bit. So it is a great tool and something I think that everyone can think about if you're serving populations that may need some help with their budget. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.